Welcome, everybody. I have one of our mentees, Jordan, here today. Jordan unearthed a fabulous lead that hits about every checkbox he has. And what we're going to do today is talk primarily about seller carry, how to negotiate it, and also get some updates on Jordan's thinking, what he likes about the deal, and how he's kind of approached it. But 2 days ago, Jordan and I spent about 2 hours on the phone going through this deal, prepping how to negotiate and everything. Jordan, catch us up to speed on what's happened in the last 48 hours.
Yeah, so it's been a great experience. It's been a wild ride. Like you said, Ryan, I identified a property. I actually got through to the owner via email, which I thought was pretty interesting. I know a lot of it. Mailers, cold calls are typically the way forward, but I was lucky enough to dig up an email address, and I shot him an email, and got a phone call the next day. The seller, I guess, came out pretty hot, just pretty much called me and said, "Hey, what's your number?" So I had to kind of tone it down a little bit and ask a few questions and say, "Hey, listen, I need to learn some more information before I can give you a number." So that was kind of the way it started off. We ended up having a really great conversation. And to your point, Ryan, I learned that it did check almost everything that I was looking for. It's less than 2 hours away. It's in a really great area that I think is going to quickly develop here in the near future. There's some value add opportunities. It's about a 34, 35 lot park with about 5 vacant pads. There's some upside value in lifting rents. It's over $100 under currently, which is a great opportunity. And it's not sub-metered. So I think there's a lot of upside there. What I did learn is that this park has been in the family since inception. I think it was the father-in-law actually built the park, and it's now kind of gone down through the family, and they're not sure what to do. They see value in keeping it and potentially expanding it, but I don't know if they want to continue to manage everything. There was a lot of emotions tied to it, which, Ryan, when I called you, I was like, "Hey, this is what the seller's thinking through. This is what he's talking about, but, on paper, I'm not sure it entirely makes sense." And you were a huge help of kind of explaining, the heartstrings that are typically attached in these scenarios. So it was really great to work with you to kind of understand, hey, what are the assumptions we need to make? Where do you think we can get this to? And let's break this down piece by piece to really see what the numbers look like so that we can come up with an offer that works best for both myself and for the seller, to make it a win-win scenario for everyone involved. So ultimately, it's in the MSA I'm looking for. It's got the value add pieces I'm looking for at a cost I think that can work. So we've been negotiating a little bit. I've recently uncovered that the decision-making process actually has to go through 3 different people. There's 3 sisters involved, which I did not know from the beginning. So, who knows what's going to come of it. And that's what I've learned over the last 48 hours is the initial conversation seemed really, really well. We almost pretty much agreed to terms verbally, but now that the rest of the family is involved in the conversation, they're not as motivated as I thought they once were. I think maybe 1 or 2 of them wants to sell and maybe 1 of them doesn't. So I don't know what's going on. I'm going to stay persistent. I'm going to follow up with them and hopefully we can get it across the finish line. But if not, I've learned a ton through the experience. So far so good, but we'll see where it goes.
So for those tuning in, Jordan is in sales. So this is his natural arena, just like me. So I love this stuff. So we could talk for hours about planning sales and overcoming objections and yada, yada, yada. But what I want to do with this call for those listening in is let's zoom in on what lessons that Jordan unearthed that you can also take from this. So two things I'm really excited about, Jordan, with this specific call. So we've been at it for a little over 45 days now. This is Jordan's first LOI in our LOI tracker, which is really exciting. So we went from 0 to now we have a live one in a really short period of time. And we accomplished a lot in those 45 days. So number one, super proud of you for that. Cause this is like literally the one town that you're like, I really like this town. And your first one is right there. I mean, talk about like imagining something and then it coming to fruition. Number one. And then number 2, and I don't remember if I told you this or not, but I was so proud when you said, it's a 30 lot park. They want $2 million for it. Like we can't do that. The debt coverage ratio is like 0.5. You can't do that.
Yep.
And then you said whatever you said to unearth, well, we did have someone kind of under contract at 1.5, but then they backed out and didn't say anything. And the reason why I am so excited you unearthed that is because the truth of the matter is everybody in their mind has a pie in the sky number, which they'll kind of shoot at you to smoke you out and get you to go away. But you
Yep.
persisted, you built rapport, you did what you had to do as a good salesperson, and then you got out a more realistic number. And then you unearth the fact that they would probably take less than that. So
Mm-hmm.
walk us through what you did to get there. And then I want to pivot into how you and I planned to attack the seller carry front.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I was just asking some deeper questions about, the history of the park and have you ever considered selling it before? And not asking very genuinely, not in a way that, I was digging for information to try to hold that against them. To your point, Ryan, I built a lot of rapport with this guy over the last couple of days. I think he began to trust me. He kind of knew that I was an individual looking to jump into this and not take over his park. Like I said earlier, this was a park that's way under rented, and they take pride in that. They want to take care of their tenants in that way. So I don't think they're looking for someone to necessarily come in there and rip rents through the roof. But I think after asking some really great questions and then understanding that his father-in-law actually built the park, I started asking about taxes. I started saying, hey, if you've built this park and you've owned it for X amount of years, how are you thinking about dealing with capital gains? I'm assuming that this is going to be a large chunk of change on your family, which is wonderful. But if you built the park, I'm assuming that capital gains would be tough. And that's when he said, hey, capital gains is actually something we're trying to avoid. And that's when the seller carry piece, Ryan, really kind of jumped into my mind. Through bank finance, to your point, the income to debt coverage ratio it just was too low. You taught me that about 1.25 is what a bank would need. And then when we started to put pieces together, we found out that at the $2 million mark, which is what he originally said, it wasn't even close. So our exercise of really drilling in to figure out what are the numbers that we would need to have in place to get the bank to potentially approve the loan, really allowed me to get a lot more information out of the seller, which was wonderful. So essentially what we did was we put together a plan, and I said, listen, if you want to sell your park and you want to get this closed with me financing through a bank, here's what your number would need to be. And it's way off from what you think the park is worth. And then I asked him actually why he thought the park was worth what it was worth, which I think is a really great question. Of course, if a seller has data and numbers, it only helps everybody understand where they're coming from. But in this scenario, the seller was like, well, the location's really great. Their future plans of what's going on around the park for the next 5 to 10 years should bring in more value, X, Y, and Z. So I started pressing him a little bit on, so you're valuing your park for the future, but you're not valuing it as it sits today. And that's when he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, well, do you think that that's fair business? If I had something and I said, hey, listen, it's not worth much today, but in 5 years, here's where I think it's going to be, and that's why I think you should pay me that number. Would you do that? And I asked that genuinely, and he said, no, I wouldn't. And I said, okay, wonderful. So I think we kind of aligned ourselves from the get-go by just asking a very honest question, which then kind of opened the book of the other information I was able to divulge, and then ultimately get to the seller carry piece to help him avoid capital gains. Show him that, hey, if we have, an interest rate that works for the best of us, you're pretty much going to be making the same that you're making today, but you're not going to be doing any work, and you're going to have a nice fat down payment as well that you didn't have access to, plus avoid the capital gains piece, which you're concerned about. So it was kind of a home run from the beginning. I think just to your original question, Ryan, just asking of, hey, how and why did you get to your original value? And then understanding that, it's something that was from the family. He thinks that there's a lot of value in the future. And then kind of reeling that back to, hey, totally understand, but let's talk through some numbers together and let's see if you can agree with me on some things. It kind of got him to open his eyes and understand exactly where I'm coming from. Plus, to your point, I was able to divulge that he already had the park under contract once at 1.5, and it didn't close. So I know I had some wiggle room there. So I'm hoping that answers your question. If not, give me any specifics, but I think that touches on it.
I actually want to ask you a kind of somewhat separate question, but before I
Yeah.
do that, I want to say that if I was to summarize every point that we were attacking when it came
Mm-hmm.
down to convincing this gentleman to consider seller carry, it came down to reliability to close.
Mm-hmm.
And one big piece of that you brought up, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but when we did our initial cold call coaching call,
Mm-hmm.
you asked me if you should have a business. Like, I'm Jordan of Cheap Lots LLC.
Yep.
And I think the big takeaway we got from that call is if you feel like you're going to be more confident, like me, hey, Archimedes Group, I'm a guy. But when I started off, I didn't need that. I was like, I'm Ryan Naris family.
Yep.
How did you find your confidence? Did you use that? Like, did you create a company and use
Totally.
that as a crutch, or how did you find your swag?
So luckily, like you said earlier, I come from sales, so I know it's a big mental game. But what I did was I kind of just role played with you a couple times, and then I kind of just did it by myself. Just figure out what do I need to say, how do I need to say it to make sure that I'm confident, but I'm also conveying the right message to whoever I'm speaking to. So the way that I found kind of my stride was I made a couple of calls. They went decent. But then when I actually got on the third cold call that I reached out about and connected with the owner, saying something along the lines of, hey, my name is Jordan. I drove past your park. I found it really interesting. I'm actually looking to acquire a park in the area. I have a few questions, I'm hoping you can help me with. Do you have a couple of minutes for, a very brief conversation? So I didn't ask about their park. I didn't say I'm in the market to buy their park. I just said I drove past your park, looked interesting. I'm interested in your market. Can I ask a couple of questions to learn a little bit more? I have not had one owner say no or be rude or hang up on me. Actually, one of them said, hey, not right now, but here's my number. Call me back later today, which I thought was really, really nice of them. So then I started asking the generic questions, such as, how many lots, what's your rent, asking about any vacancy issues, things like that. And at the end of the call, ultimately, I'm just saying, hey, out of curiosity, have you ever thought about selling? Is that something that you would be open to consider after, I just asked some very, you know, pinpointed, but on the vague side questions to just see if it's something they would be open to. And some of them have been like, no, I get calls all the time, like, we're good right now. And then I actually had one say, not right now, but, maybe later this year. So, keep in touch. So that's the way I found my stride. It's just doing it a couple times, figuring out what you're personally comfortable with. For my end, I am a direct seller, but, through the coaching of Ryan and Ian, I've kind of learned that maybe being extremely direct may not work for a lot of people. You got to build a lot of rapport and, make sure that they don't feel like they're just getting used or attacked. So to just be genuinely interested in their property, asking questions that get them to talk, which is, what I think Sales 101 will teach anybody, has gone a million miles for me.
So studies actually show that hard closing someone is by and large a necessary part of the sales
Mm-hmm.
process. Like, will you sell me this property right now? That's a
Mm-hmm.
hard close. Studies show you got to do that, but if you do it more than twice, you're most likely going to burn a relationship. So
Yep.
the optimal number of hard closes is between 1 and 2, depending on
Mm-hmm.
what you're selling. If you're a street vendor selling those fake purses on the beach, you should probably hard close a lot and frequently.
100%.
If you're in car sales like I was, in car sales, I've got a hard close at least twice if I'm being completely honest. So once or twice. When you get above and beyond that, it just starts really putting people off. So all of this to say, you can go direct and be successful. You can go indirect and be successful. But like
Mm-hmm.
Jordan just said there, sales is a mental game.
Yep.
It really is. I mean, I remember I sold 30 cars in March of 2011, and I just had the perfect mindset for it. And then when I got jaded and cynical, I really struggled to sell that type of volume. And I think a big reason was because I psyched myself out. So
Totally.
sales is everything. You've got to find your stride. And another thing I wanted to bring up, Jordan, that you said that for those not in sales, wouldn't know this particularly, or may have heard of this and don't know how important it is. Questions.
Yep.
A salesperson's best ammunition is
Mm-hmm.
questions. So for example, in the car dealership, if I meet someone out on the lot and they're like, what's your best price on this car right here? I might go, Mr. Customer, my goal is to make you happy with the price. I'm going to do everything I can to get you the best price possible. But first, we need to find the best car possible. Are you looking for a 2-door or a 4-door?
Yep.
All of a sudden, now they're like, okay, well, he didn't tell me the price, but it sounds like he's going to get aggressive on price. Yeah, I guess he's right. I really do need to pick the car first. And now
Yep.
all of a sudden, we're not on price anymore. And that was all achieved by asking a question.
And
So,
that's exactly how my call went.
bingo.
I mean, when the seller called me back, he literally said, so word for word, he goes, so you say you know all about my park, what's your number?
Right.
That is literally, after I said hello, that's what he said. And I had to tone him down a little bit. I said, hey, I appreciate the call back, but for me to get a number, can I ask you a few questions so I can understand a little bit more about your park? And he said, sure. And then we started to get into the details. And then he started spewing information that I was looking for and didn't even ask him for it, but he was answering my questions. So that's absolutely right. I think another piece to that, Ryan, is to go into any sales call with anyone, mobile home parks or not, to detach yourself from the outcome, to not have an expectation of what the call will bring, I think is super critical. Because if you as a salesperson go into every single cold call saying, I got to close this deal, I want to get this property, you're gonna drive yourself insane. You got to enjoy the process. You got to enjoy the journey. You got to enjoy talking to people. You got to enjoy learning. Those are all things that will help anybody, I think, in the sales world. So being able to just have an honest conversation and detach yourself from whatever happens, I think is critical. And if you find the right deal and it makes sense, awesome, you're going to move forward. But if not, you learned a lot. You're getting better at something by just doing it. And I'm sure there's something that you could jot down on every single call that you make that you can apply to your next call. So I think that that's super, super important as well. Because as we know, cold calling is exhausting. It is. It's tough. So to kind of just enjoy the journey rather than just the outcomes, I think is super critical and important.
Yeah, it's the truth. And by the way, I'm pretty sure I shared with you, and if I haven't already, I'll just remind me and I'll do it later. But
Yeah.
I keep a list of objection overcoming scripts,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
which in my opinion, is way more important than a cold call script.
Yep.
A cold call script is going to get you trapped in sounding robotic and leaning on it. And if you get really used to going with a script and someone hits you with a curveball, you're toast. What's more important is practicing, recording, and getting really good at overcoming objections and keeping track of that, which I would love to share with you if I hadn't already. But one big thing that those of you that are listening and that don't have a sales background have not caught that Jordan did really, really well is when the guy said, what's your number? Took it nonchalantly. Someone calling in with a cold call script. Oh, hey, I'm in this area. Okay, what's your number? How do you respond to that? That's like being on the car lot and someone says, what's your best price for this car? Right? If you don't tell them a number and you don't have a good answer and you're trying to be dodgy, you're toast. You're going to lose that client. They're going to be like, I don't trust this guy. He's a car salesman. What a schizo. But if I'm able to nonchalantly, hey, Mr. Customer, I'm going to get aggressive on this because I want to earn your business. But we were going to do this on the right car for you. What that does to people is that goes, this guy does have me in his back corner. He is going to get aggressive on the price, but he's right. There are other things that we need to accomplish before price. And Jordan did that completely nonchalantly. I wasn't on that call, but I really want to underline this because me and you, when we hear that, we're just like, oh yeah, you overcame an objection right there. But someone without sales experience wouldn't necessarily know that. So those listening in here who don't have sales experience, it is way more important for you to have a list of objections and good practiced out answers to those objections so you can just keep a conversation fluid, keep that swag about you. And again, it's all about the mental game. And Jordan's right. we've closed 2 deals so far this year. I've got another couple in the hopper. I may get them all. I may get none of them. But the truth of the matter is, of those ones that we even got to the contract phase, there are tens, if not hundreds, that I just went nowhere. So in other words, you are going to be failing way more than you're succeeding. So if you're banking on positive feedback and success, you're going to get burned out cold calling, period.
Totally.
But so love everything you're saying. This is gold. Let's
It's like
pivot
baseball,
now.
man.
Oh, we
like
love
baseball.
it. So we could talk for hours about sales, but I want to share my screen right now, because what I would like to do is I want to drill down on how we negotiated the seller carry bit, because I think what would be really valuable for the audience is to go over what objections you faced, to go over what planning you put into it, because as we know, the more prepared you are for a negotiation, like Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, you're going to get a curveball somewhere, somehow. So let's first talk about how you and I thought through this deal and how we planned to attack the seller carry bit. And then let's talk about what actually happened, what you learned in the process, and how you're going to proceed forward with this lead. So why don't we start on the bit about how you came to, so we basically cut off at, he wanted 2 mil, he's under contract at 5. The numbers don't even work at really 1.5. How did you think through that? And then how did you prep for the seller carry talk?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you see on the spreadsheet, we kind of outlined both scenarios. Okay, what would this look like if it was financed through a bank, and what would it look like if it was financed through seller carry? And essentially what we did from a bank perspective is we just outlined the numbers that the seller provided me, and we made a few assumptions. So how many lots, how many of them are vacant, what's their lot rent, etc. And we just saw what the numbers look like today. And Ryan, something that you taught me was the DCR, as I referred to before. If we were to go through a bank, it has to be at least at 1.25. So that essentially quickly became the most important number for me, because it needs to make sense to make an offer. Like for me to make an offer, I need to be confident that the bank could work with me. So we plugged and chugged the numbers at the value that the seller said at $2 million. And we said, okay, what does the DCR look like? What does the cap rate look like? What does the cash on cash look like, etc. And the numbers were not thrilling.
Here, let's do it. Watch.
Let's do it right now.
I'm going to change this to 2 mil.
Yep, let's do it.
And our DCR is like 0.5.
Yep, 0.5. So we're way off, right? We're way off. And if you look at the cap rate, it's at 3. So, I mean, where I am at, like where I physically live, parks are trading a little bit higher than that. Not much. I'm in a pretty wild area. But for the area I'm looking at this park in, it should be substantially higher. So that was a concern. But really, Ryan, the one that popped off the page as well was the price per lot. Northmark, you showed me, just came out with a study or some data, I guess you could say, about what parks are trading at and what the average price per pad is. And I think it's about 37,000, maybe just under 38 grand per lot. And this isn't a large park, right? We're talking about a lot right now that has 34 total lots with 5 vacant pads. So if you're looking at the $2 million mark for 29 lots right now, we're looking at almost $70,000 per pad, which is insane. So at that number, I would be overpaying $30,000 per pad. I know I couldn't get the bank to approve the loan at, essentially a 0.5% DCR. And then the numbers just don't make sense. So, this quickly showed me that, his number just would not work. But it also gave me the ability to say, okay, what number does work? And how can I talk the seller down to my number and have some science and data behind it so that he can understand where I'm coming from? So that's kind of how we generally started. Obviously, we talked about what type of money and funds would we need to put into the property for the value add opportunities, X, Y, and Z. But those are really the key driving factors that we analyzed when we were first kind of taking a deep dive.
That's awesome. And what I want to now pivot into is right here on the right. What we decided was, let's get a pie in the sky number where if you got it, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got this.
Yep.
All right, I'm pretty happy with this number. And then All right, fine, just do it.
Hmm.
So tell me how you kind of math your way into those three numbers.
Absolutely. So, we created this nice little spreadsheet here that has a lot of formulas in it. So we just kind of plugged and chugged these numbers within our formula to see what the numbers look like. So, at $1 million, right? Which was a tough number to think through. It's $1 million less than the seller's emotional number that he came up with. So, it's tough to say, hey, this is what I can offer. It's $1 million less. He probably would have laughed. So I didn't want to insult anyone. But again, the numbers have to work. So we threw $1 million in there, and here's what we saw. The price per pad is a lot more reasonable. The DCR is close. It's a little less. But what we saw is that, there's ways to get that DCR up so that the bank could approve the loan. And what we talked about is what would need to happen. And I think it's a little bit reflected under that needs to happen piece. We would have to raise rents over $100 a month, essentially, from where they are today to get there. And as I said earlier, the seller did not want someone to come in there and raise rents because they've had the park for a while and they care about their tenants. So that was a way for me to kind of sell the seller as to, hey, if we want to finance this through a bank, here's what the numbers would look like, and here's what I would need to implement day one in order to get there. Knowing that that is not what he preferred, nor what I prefer necessarily. So that helped me a lot. Also looking at the cap rates, the cash on cash returns, everything got a little bit better. I know it's not totally accurate at what we're looking at right now, but when we have, some updated figures here, they were super critical. I think the cash on cash, it got up to like 20% when we really took a deep dive, which is where we wanted to be, and the cap rate was close to 10.
Right.
So that was really awesome. So those were kind of the things that I analyzed. And then I did it again at the medium number and again at the high number. We played with the rent price. So, Ryan, if you go to the
Sure.
rent column there and you jump that up to like 450s, let's say, there, exactly. That's what the numbers would look like, right? A little bit better. So, we're just trying to think through what we could do. Obviously, the expense ratio would drop if we submetered the property. So, we just kind of thought through what would this look like at the end of the day. And there you go. That looks
Bring in
pretty good
5
on mine.
homes, get rents up to 450 from 320, cut
Yeah.
expenses, but really not that much. It's I think he was the expenses were around 50 or 60 to begin with, so keeping expenses kind of the same.
Yep.
And look, the path is to get to the 20% cash on cash. Now,
Yep.
this isn't going to be tomorrow. We got to bring in 5 homes. We got to sell 3 park-owned homes. We're going to have to raise rents pretty significantly, but it's a win.
Yep. Absolutely. So that is, that's the way we kind of looked at that. And then we did it, again at the 1.25 and the 1.35 number. And, it's that becomes a personal decision, right?
Right.
Where do the numbers need to be for me to be comfortable? How much money do I have to put in this, and how much time do I need to put in this to get the outcome that I want? So in my mind, what's worth my time and what's worth my money would be at that 1.35 million at the top end. I'm trying to make this a fair game. So, when we made the offer, I put it at that medium number of the 1.25. But if the seller came back and said, hey, listen, I need it at 1.35 and we can move forward, I know based on the analysis that you and I ran, Ryan, I would say, let's do it. That is kind of the way we looked at the bank finance deal. But what I did is, I said, hey, listen, here's what I can offer from a bank finance, but also here are the 3 to 5 things I would have to implement at your park come day one. And I knew that those were deterrents for the seller, but I had to be honest with them. So, if that's the route he wants to go and he doesn't want to hold the note for any reason, then, hey, let's look at those numbers. But then we pivoted over to seller carry. And I think that's where both I and the seller want to go. That made both of our lives a little bit easier, but we're still not at the end yet, so we'll see where it goes.
So one piece that I want to kind of drill down on right now is the contingencies for the bank debt. So first off, we're running this at 1.25 mil basically, which is $250,000 below what he had it under contract for. That's tough to get. Getting it at $1 million, although obviously we want it in theory for $1 if we can get it. There's going to be a point where he's just going to hang up on you and never take your call again. So the reason why we settled on $1 million is because we figured it's still really aggressive. Basically a 33% discount he's probably never going to say yes to that. But we think that 1.25 may actually happen. So what Jordan and I ran through here is, okay, let's do this. What is it going to take to make the numbers work at 1.25? And the truth of the matter is, we want to get a bank at a 30-year amortization, which is probably not going to happen on a really small property like this. It's just not, because the debt amount is just really small, and most banks, it's just too much work for too little pop and too much risk. So they're probably not going to do it. Interest rate's probably going to be a little bit higher. I think 5.25 is reasonable. 70% LTV would be great, but most of these banks want full recourse and at least 75%. And again, this is all with 1.25. So realistically, we're probably going to hit a 20-year AM, at best case scenario, maybe even 12 or 15. So we ran it at 5.25 with 20-year AM. And again, it's only because it's a small property. And not that this guy needs to know any of that, but what this gentleman needs to know are what contingencies that you face. So in other words, best case scenario, pie in the sky bank numbers, you're still at a DCR of barely over 1.
Yep.
Right? Just in place, you're barely over 1. And the truth of the matter is, you're going to have to raise rents day one, which he doesn't want you to do, understandably.
Yep.
You're going to have to cut expenses big time up front, which, by the way, billing back water is a rent increase. So maybe isn't going to be a big fan of that. It may actually need to be less than 1.25, which he's probably not going to like. Exactly. And then here's the deal. Even if everything goes perfect. Now, all of this is if everything goes perfect and everything within your control, you're able to control, and your banker partner, same story. If everybody is on the same page, but you get roasted by an appraiser who has no idea what he's doing, which has happened to me twice in 60 days in the same county. I just got really unlucky with a really bad appraiser.
Yeah.
The whole thing could be toast. If the appraisal comes back at 800,000, you're done. So in other words, everything could go, even if everything goes perfectly well, you still need to put your selling shoes on at a DCR of a hair over 1 in place. And even if everything goes perfectly, there's something that could come completely out of control and crush you. Yep. So it all comes down to this. It's riskier because it's smaller for the bank, and it's more work for less profit for the bank. So because of all of that, the interest rate is going to be higher. The AM is going to be shorter. It's just going to be tougher. And again, everything literally needs to go perfect to hit this 1.25.
Yep. That's
so,
right. And I mean, like you said, the appraisal alone could be a total deal breaker, which is a concern. You know, who knows what's really going on at the property.
And if you hit this guy over the head with all of those facts, because the best way to deal with delusions, not that this gentleman's not a rational, calm, open person, but everybody is slightly delusional. It's a spectrum, right? And the best way to deal with delusions is to try to force them to think on data and facts. And everything right there is just an armory of ammunition that you have going into it. Now, maybe he folds and you don't need to use any of it. Maybe you need to go on full battle mode and hit him with every single bit of that. But the point is, when you are rolling into a seller carry negotiation, to have that in your armory ready to go, that is exactly what you need to actually have a productive conversation. So taking all of that in your back pocket, now let's kind of pivot over to what you did over here when you started going over terms with him on seller carry. And then I'm interested to hear how he responded to shooting out the 15-year AM at you.
Yep, absolutely. So with seller carry, obviously we would love the 30-year AM, so as long as possible. Obviously, one of the upsides for seller carry deal is the lower interest rate. So what we did is we did 4 1/8, and what that did is essentially gave them more or less the exact same amount of income that they're making today at the park. So we thought that was a fair deal. It's like, hey, you're not losing any revenue, you're not losing any profit really. you're really making the same thing, but you don't have to manage the park. You just literally collect some mailbox money every single month, and you can deposit that in your account. Another upside for me, and I guess for the seller as well, would be the loan to value ratio. It's a little bit not as aggressive, so the down payment out of my pocket would be a little bit less, but it helps the seller from a capital gain standpoint. So, we looked at 20% down from a seller carry deal, rather than you can see on the bank side would be a 30% down payment. So it helps me and it would help them, which is really, really great. And then, I think everything else we looked at, Ryan, we've talked about. I don't need to, repeat myself 4 times, but those are really the pieces that we put in place. And then what I did is I kind of scaled this out, right? So if their monthly interest payment is $5K a month, what does that make them per year? So, I just kind of try to make that a very, very clear picture for the seller, so he could understand the impact to himself and to his family.
Yeah, that big piece that I just added right there was when we did the math, we ended up finding out that their debt installment was going to be roughly what they were making. So
Mm-hmm.
in other words, hey, Mrs. mobile home park owner, imagine having passive income that everybody talks about, everybody wants. You have passive income for roughly the same amount. And the only effort that you need to make is opening the envelope, depositing it at the bank,
Yep.
and you're done.
Yep.
It's a really compelling sales pitch. Look, you want to sell it, I want to buy it. You don't want to miss out the income. You're literally making about the same amount, and you're delaying capital gains, just like you said. Now, the one bit that he hit you with, which I was really excited, which we didn't talk about on Wednesday, which he basically said, hey, I want this to be paid off in 15 years. And
Yep.
if you look at the numbers, 15 years isn't great. So what
No.
did you and I talk about that is a great way to overcome that?
Yeah, you helped me a ton with that. So what we decided on is like, okay, he wants 15-year AM. How can we do that? So what we decided on was, hey, let's throw out a 15-year term with a 30-year AM and a balloon payment after year 15. So it helps him pay off the note in 15 years. It gives me the ability to have that flexibility, but we both know that within 15 years, that park would be refied or sold. So it's a little bit riskier in the sense that I would have a large payment after 15 years, but at the end of the day, we all know that I wouldn't get there. So it's a really, really nice way to look at it. It gave the seller what he was looking for. It gave me the flexibility I was looking for. So it really ended up being a win-win. So I think that was something that piqued his interest. I don't think he thought about that prior. So, Ryan, to your credit, that was a really, really great way to approach that.
So if you see here on the left, after you bring in 5 homes and get it to 450 a month,
Mm-hmm.
at a 15-year AM, your cash on cash is not even 3. So
Yep.
that's a ton of risk, a ton of work
Mm-hmm.
to basically make not a whole lot of money.
Yep.
But for those who aren't overly familiar with how you can structure a loan, you can put the amortization at 30 years, but have a term of 15, which just in layman's terms is, hey, look, I want this whole thing paid off in 15 years. So the seller says, I want this thing paid in full in 15 years. And what Jordan basically says is, I will pay this off in 15 years, but I'm going to make payments for 15 years like I'm paying it off in 30. And at that 15-year anniversary, I'm going to give you a big stack of cash. But again, with what Jordan said is, in 15 years, is he still going to own this? And number one, still going to own this. And number two, not have refinanced it?
Yep.
Probably not. And
Yep.
if it did come down to that, at the end of the day, you could probably renegotiate with this family. So
Mm-hmm.
that piece alone was absolutely huge, because what I've noticed in my many years of negotiating seller carry is a lot of times people, once you browbeat them, it feels like sometimes into considering seller carry, then they want just these ridiculous terms. So it's like, it's a fight to get them to consider seller carry, and then it's a fight to bring them to reality. So having that in your back pocket, again, another great weapon in your armory to pull out and know, hey, look, you want it paid off in 15 years, but at the same time, I got to make cash flow here. Let's amortize this over 30 years, but have a balloon payment in year 15. boom, we are ready. And as you can see over here on the left, all of a sudden we're talking about teens cash on cash return after you raise rents, bring in homes. And here's the great part. When you get expenses way down, you have
There it is. Yep.
20% plus cash on cash return. Now, again, this isn't tomorrow. This is just back of the napkin math. This isn't tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of execution risk. There's going to be a lot of, unknowns there. Can I pass through the water successfully? Is there going to be a tree that falls on a home? There's a lot of risk here, but all of a sudden, Jordan took someone who wanted a number that ain't nobody going to pay. Yep. He brought them down. He unearthed a really vital bit of information, which is they actually had it under contract for a whole lot less. And he also unearthed that actually I would probably take less than that. And because the seller at the end of the day is going to want reliability to close. If Jordan isn't even confident he can get a bank loan at 1.25%, seller carry becomes a really viable option. And now that he has all of these weapons and ammunition in his armory, he's ready to go to battle. And what I coached him to say too is you can walk through the numbers with him at 1.25% and still emphasize the point that may still not get done. Yep. I will give you another $50,000. $50,000 if we do seller carry. You win because you make more money and you get more reliability to close. I win because I can now drive this ship and make sure that I'm cash flowing the way I need to be excited and to pull off the business plan. And even worst case scenario, if some of these don't work out, your DCR is basically 2. You have a ton of margin for error there. So for your first park ever, you have a path to 20% plus cash on cash return. And you have a ton of margin of safety if something goes wrong. So all in all, this is an outstanding first property for you if it ends up happening. And you're going to learn a lot. You're going to make a lot. The family's going to be ecstatic. It is a win-win for everyone. And we were able to do this because we did a ton of research and prep before we even had those conversations.
That's right. And I'll be honest, Ryan, I would have never been able to get through the conversations in the fashion that I did with the ammunition that I had if it wasn't for your help. I probably could have tiptoed through it and made some progress, but to be able to really understand the moving pieces, the contingencies, come up with a price range, understand why a bank would or wouldn't do a deal. Those pieces for someone that's relatively new to the business was invaluable. So, just thank you again for all your help with that. I don't think I could have done it without your assistance.
Well, I can't thank you enough for the kind words. And I also have to say we are recording this and I am posting this everywhere. So now you pretty much have to make this happen.
Well, if not, I'll let everybody know why. I'll do everything in my power to make it happen. If not, I'll keep everyone updated on to why not. And maybe people can learn from that experience as well.
Well, Jordan, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to show everyone what you and I went through. And I'm going to be talking to you real soon here. And guys, for anyone who wants to reach out to Jordan, he's on our Facebook group. I'm going to tag him on this. Reach out to him. Look, we're a community here. We all want to help each other out, whether you're in the mentorship program or not. So Jordan, I can't thank you enough for taking the time here. And it's been fun, man.
You bet. Thank you, Ryan. I always enjoy chatting with you, and this was an awesome recap. So looking forward to talking with you soon, and I'll keep everyone updated on how this pans out.
Yeah.